Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Believe it or not, the running back position may be more solid right now than we've seen in a few years for fantasy purposes. We were talking about it yesterday as a team. Right now, it just feels like there are a ton of guys locked in as the number one running back, and there's very few teams that have a carousel of guys that we're having a headache trying to figure out every single week. And that's great because it makes things way easier on us when we're trying to set our fantasy lineups every single week. And normally in these start and sit videos, I'll give you several pick'ems that I absolutely love over on Underdog for the week. But this week, they're actually in the middle of maintenance today, and I don't have the ability to even see their pick'ems as of right now. So instead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put all of my pick'ems over in Discord over the next couple of days so our members can check all of them out, which means this is a great opportunity for you to see what it's like to be a member here of the exclusive Headliner Nation. All you need to do is hit that blue join button down below. If you join our $5 tier, it's gonna get you access to a bunch of extra members only content that post here on YouTube all the time. But if you want access to all of that extra content and you wanna see all of my pick'ems for the week, then think about joining our $10 tier, which is gonna get you access to a ton of information, not only here on YouTube, but over in Discord, and you can see my pick'ems that I'm gonna be dropping throughout the week. But it also gives you an opportunity to connect with other members of Headliner Nation that are also doing pick'ems over on Underdog and bringing in some banger tickets as well. And Thursday night football this week is going to be a really fun AFC North matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to be seeing a whole lot of Derrick Henry on Thursday night football. But Chase Brown is coming off of a huge week in week 9, but this week against Baltimore may not go exactly how he would like. The good news for Chase Brown is he's going to be the guy. Zach Moss is out indefinitely. And they did end up trading for Khalil Herbert, but he's not really going to make all that big of an impact right now. Baltimore hasn't even had their bye yet, and they're still allowing the second fewest rushing yards to opposing running backs this season. Now, the biggest reason why is game script. Right now, Baltimore has been blowing out opponents in their wins, and because of that, teams can't run the ball against them. If Cincinnati can keep this game close through the air and then utilize Chase Brown down in the red zone, he could end up seeing a touchdown this week. And he's going to see plenty of volume because he's going to be the main running back. But this is not an easy matchup, and it doesn't bring a great ceiling. What else is there to say about Derrick Henry? The King is having a career season, and we knew the fit in Baltimore was going to be perfect. Cincinnati is allowing the 4th most rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs this season. And maybe the yards aren't as high as we would like this week from Derrick Henry, but he has scored a touchdown in every single game. And Cincinnati should allow him the opportunity to find the end zone once again. When we get to the end of the 2024 season, I really hope Tyrone Tracy ends up being one of my best off-season calls. This was a guy that I absolutely loved with the potential to replace Devin Singletary as the starter, and that has officially happened. In the last 5 weeks, he has 3 finishes inside the top 24, and 2 of those are top 10 finishes. His efficiency is excellent. He's getting the majority of the carries and the snaps, and he is the clear starter with the Giants. And now in week 10, he gets to face the defense that is giving up the most rushing touchdowns, rushing yards, and fantasy points per game to the running back position. Right now, the New York Giants are allowing the 6th most rushing yards to the running back position, and Chuba Hubbard continues to be a really pleasant surprise for those of you that took a stab on him later in your drafts. Now, Jonathan Brooks is going to end up being back this week, and he's not going to have anywhere close to a decent workload probably for a while at this point. In fact, this far into the season, we may not see Jonathan Brooks really ramp up his carries until next season. There's no reason getting him hurt when you're going to be looking to 2025 anyway. If Carolina can keep the game close against the Giants this week, Chuba Hubbard may not see a ton of touchdown potential, but he could rack up a decent amount of yards if we can see about 20 or so carries. If that can happen, he could give you a really nice RB2 floor, but I'm not really sure that he's going to go any higher than that. With Ramondre Stevenson, I'm being cautiously optimistic. Over his last 4 games, He's been a top 12 running back 3 times, and the other game really was because he was limited coming off of an injury and didn't really see all that many touches. Ramondre Stevenson is scoring right now though. His efficiency hasn't been all that good, and we're really relying on those touchdowns for him to get inside the top 12. So just be very cautious with how you look at Ramondre Stevenson right now. But this Chicago Bears defense is just outside the top 10 most fantasy points per game and rushing yards allowed to running backs. And they're tied for 4th with most rushing touchdowns allowed to running backs this season. And the Patriots are going to need to run the football against Chicago in order to beat them. You can't let Drake May go out and throw the ball 35, 40 times a game against this defense. Ramondre Stevenson, to me, may not have the most ceiling in the world this week, but he's a low-risk play for me because I still like his floor. DeAndre Swift could be in for a really solid week as well. Last week was a little bit of a disappointment. He really should have played better, but Chicago as a whole didn't play all that well. This week against the Patriots, though, he definitely should be back on track. The New England Patriots are currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs and also allowing the 2nd most rushing yards and 2nd most rushing touchdowns to running backs. But one thing to keep an eye on this week is whether or not Caleb Williams will be limited. If he is, they may need to run the ball an awful lot. And if they do, DeAndre Swift will be the guy. It really feels like James Cook is having some high highs and some low lows right now. Since week 4, he's either been inside the top 6 running backs or outside the top 27 running backs. And I would love to see him get a little bit more consistent. And he's got a good matchup this week to do that. But these concerns are going to continue to arise if Ray Davis keeps having big explosive plays. Now, Ray Davis didn't have a ton of volume this past week, so it wasn't really a major concern how many touches he got. It's more of a major concern of that big play that he had and then finding himself in at the goal line a little bit later on in the game. We need to continue to monitor this situation. I don't love that for James Cook. He's got medium risk for me this week, but it doesn't mean that he shouldn't be in your lineup. He should still be a really decent play if Buffalo can establish a good lead. Even though the Buffalo Bills haven't allowed a ton of rushing touchdowns this season, they're still allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs. Jonathan Taylor, he had a tougher matchup last week against Minnesota. This one should be a lot better. And with Joe Flacco at quarterback, hopefully this offense can find some consistency, spread the ball a little bit in the passing game, and then Jonathan Taylor can find himself with some more open lanes and some bigger games ahead. Javonte Williams really hasn't been good this season, and I don't know if it's exactly all him, if it's the offensive scheme. I mean, some of it has to do with the fact that Denver throws the ball 30 to 40 times every single game, but unfortunately, Williams just hasn't been able to get it going. It did feel like there was a little bit of life. He finishes the top 24 running back, had a bad week, and then finished as the RB6. But since then, he has not been able to get anything going. He's been an RB1 one time this season. He's been an RB2 one time this season. And right now, Sean Payton is making comments that Audric Estime may end up getting more touches moving forward. So you know what? With as bad as the backfield has been, and now we don't really know who's going to be the main guy, I'm going to go ahead and list the entire Denver Broncos backfield as my Mando must-avoid running backs of the week. We've seen Sean Payton make comments before that so-and-so is going to get more looks, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, and it never ends up happening. So I wouldn't be shocked if Estime really didn't end up getting a whole lot more touches than what we've seen, but I also believe he's probably going to get at least a few more moving forward, which is going to create a straight 3-person timeshare in this backfield in an offense that throws the ball an awful lot. There's really no fantasy value with any of these guys right now, and this matchup this week is not that good either. So just like I use Mando to avoid all of those unnecessary odors because they've got a 72-hour clinically proven formula to help keep me smelling really good, I've got to miss out on these guys as well. And this week, I'm going to skip on all 3 of these guys. I don't even have Jaleel McLaughlin listed. There's no reason to. But if you want to get our starter pack from Mando, head on over to shopmando.com and use code word headliners when you check out, because you're going to get $5 off the price, which is essentially 40% off. Headliners at shopmando.com and get your starter pack right now. People keep asking about Isaiah Pacheco, and realistically, maybe the end of November we can start talking about him again. But for right now, Kareem Hunt's been an excellent fill-in, not just for the Chiefs, but for our fantasy lineups. He's been giving you some pretty decent games. And this past Monday, you got over 100 yards and a touchdown from him. Moving forward, he's going to be a pretty decent floor option. He's not really a guy that I want as my RB1 or really even my RB2, but if you're flexing him consistently, you're probably in not that bad of a situation with your team anyway. This week, high-end RB3, low-end RB2, realistically from a volume standpoint is what we're going to see. If he can score a touchdown, then maybe we'll see him get a little bit closer to high-end RB2 status. When you drafted Bijan Robinson, you were hoping top 6 potential every single week on a consistent basis. And he really hasn't done that. So Bijan Robinson doesn't feel great in your lineups every single week, but he hasn't been awful either. He's had a decently solid floor for a few weeks now. Well, these are the type of matchups where we really need to see Bijan Robinson take advantage of it. Right now, the Saints are allowing the 8th most rushing yards, 7th most fantasy points per game, and they are tied for 2nd in most rushing touchdowns allowed to running backs. So Bijan, this is where you take advantage of it. This is where you give us some top 6 potential, and then we'll keep taking the floor if you have other bad matchups, because that's realistically what makes him a good start every single week with very low risk. There's a chance that Alvin Kamara sees like 15 targets this week. I mean, who is Derek Carr realistically going to throw the ball to more? Chris Olave probably isn't going to play. Rashid Shaheed is already out. Bub Means is already out. And you've got some tight end options there, but nobody's going to warrant the type of targets that Alvin Kamara will have. So regardless of how difficult this matchup may be on the ground, through the air, Alvin Kamara is a top 12 option based on his work in the passing game this week alone. For those of you that drafted Christian McCaffrey at the beginning of the first round, you may finally be able to utilize him. Now, if you've made it this far and you're still in the playoff hunt or leading the pack in your fantasy league, you are in a really, really good spot. Christian McCaffrey, however, may not be the guy that you want him to right away in week 10. First off, there's no guarantee he's even going to play. As of right now, they've opened up his practice window. They're going to see how the week goes, and maybe he ends up making it out onto the field. But even if he plays this week, I have a hard time believing he's going to see a Christian McCaffrey-like workload. And there's going to be a split with Jordan Mason, who is back at practice this week. We'll continue to monitor this situation throughout the rest of the week, make updates where we need to, but right now the 49ers running back situation, it's a little foggy for the next couple of weeks until Christian McCaffrey is back, healthy, and fully taken over. At least San Francisco's backfield isn't as big of a mess as what Tampa Bay's is, because right now it's literally impossible to try and start any of these guys in your lineup because they're all playing. Rachaad White, he had an opportunity to score the touchdown. Bucky Irving, he had 4 more rushing attempts than Rachaad White. Rachaad White had almost double the amount of snaps that Bucky Irving did. I really don't know the game plan when it comes to the Tampa Bay Bucks and what they're going to be doing. And in this matchup, that's going to be a little bit more on the difficult side. For me personally, I'm probably going to try and stay out of it unless you need to try and throw in Rachaad White or Bucky Irving because of their work in the passing game with so many people injured. I do need to offer my apologies to Mike Tomlin because when he made the switch to Russell Wilson, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Justin Fields had been playing well. You had a winning record. It didn't feel like making a change at the quarterback position was really needed at that point. But this offense looks 10 times better with Russell Wilson at quarterback right now, and he looks to be a little vintage to go with it. Now, one of the good things about that move is that it's helped Najee Harris. Over the last couple of weeks, he has looked way better than he did in the previous weeks. Over the last 3 weeks, Harris has 3 straight top 24 performances, and one of those was also a top 10 performance included in it. Harris has had a really solid floor as of late, and he should have it again in this matchup here. But Washington is also allowing the 5th most rushing yards per game, so Harris may be able to find himself back inside the top 10 once again. Austin Eckler may be a safer pick this week than Brian Robinson. Now, Brian Robinson last week was expected to play. Gets there on Sunday morning, goes through his pregame workouts, and then is all of a sudden inactive. So it sounds like he was at least close and probably going to be pretty close to playing this week as well. But with a hamstring injury, you always want to be careful, and this is a tougher matchup. So Austin Eckler may end up being a safer bet this week because of work in the passing game and the fear of re-injury not nearly as high. Jacksonville doesn't allow a ton of rushing yards to running backs, but they do allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to the running back position, based largely on the fact they give up quite a few rushing touchdowns and a lot of receiving yards to the running back position, which to me is a perfect setup for Aaron Jones this week to have a really nice floor and a really high ceiling. There's going to be a couple of question marks in this week's matchup for the backfield in Jacksonville. Minnesota is allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. So clearly this is not going to be an easy matchup. But what are we going to get from the timeshare now? Tank Bigsby looked to have taken over this backfield. But now that Travis Etienne is back and healthy and looked better last week, you got to wonder if Tank is going to start losing some touches once again. We may end up seeing a split backfield, and Travis Etienne is going to see some goal line work potentially and definitely some work in the passing game, while Tank Bigsby is probably going to be the majority of the early down work. Whatever it may end up being, this is going to be a medium risk this week because both of these guys will probably be needed if Jacksonville is going to win this game. Tony Pollard continues to give us some really good consistency at the running back position. If you drafted him, you probably drafted him as like your RB3. So the fact that he's given you at least RB2 numbers in every game but 2 this season is well worth the investment that you made on him. Now, his matchup this week is not all that great, but he's going to get a majority of the touches once again, and hopefully the volume is enough to establish a decent floor. But this Chargers defense is really good. Jesse Minter is killing it there, and there's no shock. So this week, if you have to play Tony Pollard, I just wouldn't expect a high-end RB2 performance. He's probably going to be borderline RB3, low-end RB2. It was good to see another really explosive performance from J.K. Dobbins this week, especially in a matchup that was much harder on paper than what we saw. Now, if you're going to beat Tennessee, you're going to have to run the football, and more than likely, that's what the Chargers are really going to focus on this week. Does J.K. Dobbins find the end zone 2 times again? Probably not, but if you can give me 60 to 70 rushing yards and a touchdown, then J.K. Dobbins absolutely is a guy that should be in your lineup. And in 4 games since their bye week, J.K. Dobbins has been inside the top 24 running backs 3 separate times. 2 of those times inside the top 12. We really have a tale of 2 teams here in this matchup, especially at the running back position. Saquon Barkley is one of the safest running backs in all of football right now. If you own him, he's a plug in every single game, and you've been just fine with his performances. And they're going to continue, especially this week against this Dallas defense. But then on the Dallas side, you've got a backfield that just seems to be an absolute mess. You've got a wide receiver that's dealing with a shoulder injury, and you've got a quarterback that's likely going to miss the next few weeks because of a hamstring injury. Just that and the fact that the Dallas Cowboys as a whole are not very good right now, I can't find myself playing Rico Dowdle. I know you got a touchdown out of him last week, and it was a pretty crazy catch for him to even make that touchdown work. And with no Dak Prescott, maybe he sees a fair amount of volume this week. But you know you still have Dalvin Cook that could get some touches. Zeke was suspended last week, but he should be back this week potentially. And Rico Dowdle to me just isn't super safe because everything around him right now is a big question mark. Breece Hall has only been a top 10 running back twice in the last 6 games, so the ceiling isn't quite there. But now that they've added Devontae Adams and the offense feels like it's rolling a little bit more, the floor hasn't been all that bad, and I expect that he's going to see a higher ceiling as the season wears on. And maybe this week going up against Arizona, who allows the 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs, Breece Hall can find some of that upside that he's been missing as of late. Now, the New York Jets are allowing the 9th most rushing yards to opposing running backs, so James Conner is in line for a really nice floor this week. If you're going to beat the New York Jets, you can't go out there and throw it. And Kyler Murray hasn't been all that good as of late. He's had some really good performances, but he also hasn't had some great performances either. So running the football is going to be really important. And if we can get James Conner right around 20 carries, he should get you right around 10 fantasy points. It really doesn't matter who they play. If you own Jahmyr Gibbs, he's in your lineup. And if you need a safe play, David Montgomery is in your lineup as well. Now, the Houston defense has been very solid against the run this season. They are inside the top 10 of fewest fantasy points per game allowed, fewest rushing touchdowns allowed, and fewest rushing yards allowed to the running back position. Gibbs is a smash start no matter what. He's going to be close to top 12 potential every single week. David Montgomery without a touchdown gives you a decent RB2 floor. But if you want more ceiling than that, then he would have to score that touchdown. And this week, he may not be able to get it unless Detroit can get the ball into the red zone. And then, of course, pound it with David Montgomery from there. The Detroit Lions aren't as sharp as they were last season against the run here in 2024, but they're still doing a pretty good job. If you take a look at just the numbers, they do show as a very strong defense stopping opposing running backs. Now, over the course of the last 3 games, they have allowed anywhere from 90 to 95 rushing yards to each of the RB1s that they faced. And going up against Joe Mixon this week could also lend to that happening once again. Now, can you run against Detroit? Yes, you've been able to this year, but it's really interesting to see if Houston can keep this game close. Detroit has been putting a lot of opponents in a hole as of recent, and when they do that, you kind of have to abandon the run and you lose some of that upside. So Joe Mixon, super safe floor this week, should still see anywhere from 80 to 90 rushing yards. But will he find the end zone to give him the ceiling that you want? Monday Night Football could have a couple of huge running back performances with Devon Achane and Kyren Williams both on fire right now. Since Tua returned from his concussion, Devon Achane has been the RB2 and the RB3. He's definitely found that ceiling once again now that opposing defenses have to respect the pass a little bit more. And Kyren Williams hasn't been outside the top 24 running backs all season long. And both of these matchups are pretty good for the running backs. Now, the Miami defense is a little bit softer against the run, allowing the 4th most fantasy points to running backs and the 2nd most touchdowns. So Kyren Williams definitely has a high ceiling for me this week, and he's got one of the safest floors in all of football. Devon Achane definitely has a high ceiling. Now, his floor is a little bit weirder to try and keep an eye on just because Raheem Mostert and Jalen Wright are both getting some touches. And we know that Miami's going to throw the football as well. So Devon Achane, definitely a high upside play and should be inside the top 12 again. But there you go, Headliner Nation. Hopefully all of the start and sit advice in this running back show is getting you ready to roll. And my job is a little bit easier with running backs right now because we're not trying to figure out 15 different backfields. Everybody has a starter and somebody that's in line to be the majority ball carrier right now. There's really only 3 or 4 offenses that we don't really like. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here to the channel, turn on your bell notifications so you don't miss any new content or our live shows. And like I said at the beginning of the video, consider becoming a member today and taking advantage of those perks. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm gonna get out of here. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.